around, and so I thought it would be a nice backdrop. We actually ended up going with a different backdrop, but nonetheless, I got this piece out of the deal. So I would like to welcome you all here. Thank you very much for joining us for this edition of ArtEvolve, and I would like to introduce, I'm going to make sure I get this right, so I'm going to read this from my prompter. Ellie Porter, Head of Program at Art360 Foundation for DAX. Katrina Stamatopoulos, I'm sorry for butchering that. Please tell us the correct pronunciation, Katrina.
Stamatopoulos.
Stamatopoulos, of course.
Very close.
Artist and co-founder of Equivalent Behavior in North London. Tom Trevor, curator, writer, and previous artistic director for the Atlantic Project in Plymouth. And myself, the founder and CEO of Articheck, just in case you're new to this webinar series. And I'm excited to speak with you all about creating a sustainable future and reconditioning art and institutional practice. So I think right off the bat, what we're going to do is just go around and introduce ourselves. Maybe Ellie, you could kick us off.
Yeah, sure. Hello, everyone. I'm Ellie Porter from Art360 Foundation. And for those who maybe aren't familiar with Art360, it's an independent charity that supports artists and estates with archiving and legacy planning. And we mainly do this through a bursary program, which offers tailored practical support and consultation, as well as working with lots of freelance archivists, curators, conservators across the country. And we're currently running a program called Artist Legacies in the Museum, which is around creating presence for Black British artists in museum contexts. So that's our main project alongside the bursary program at the moment.
Very cool. And Tom, do you want to go next?
Sure. Hi everyone. I'm Tom Trevor. As Annika says, I'm a curator and writer. Actually, I'm a professor at Exeter University, where I run a MA in curating, and I've been curating for such a long time. I've previously run organisations. I used to be director of Arnolfini from 2005, SpaceX before that, but more recently I've been working internationally, working on biennials and international art projects. So I curated a biennial in Osaka in 2015, helped to set one up in Aarhus in Denmark. And then I've come back to be more place-based. So as Annika says, I set up the Atlantic Project in the Southwest, which is a pilot, hopefully for an ongoing biennial in future years.
Exciting. And Katrina, could you please give us an introduction to yourself and then maybe launch straight into your presentation? Oh, sorry.
Hi, I'm Katrina Stamatopoulos, and I'm an artist working mainly with photography and food, using waste as material. And I run a space called Equivalent Behavior with my partner, Wojciech Kawczuk, who runs Stock Studios, which is he makes furniture, and together we run the space, which we have a scanning studio for photographers, working on digitizing archives. I'm also a digitizing technician, so I also work with artists on high-res scanning for exhibitions, or work with them on kind of archiving their projects and translating documents from physical to digital. And we also have a curated program of events here focusing on sound and installation, workshops, and also food. And I'll just, yeah. So I guess I'll launch into the presentation. I'm just going to put a timer on because I could go on. So I'll just share my screen. 1 second, there it is. Okay. So as I said, I work a lot with photography and the physicality of the photographic medium, and also with food. I'm going to begin with this image, which is a photograph of some preserved bones from a project called My Barium Meal. And barium is a substance that's ingested for a kind of an examination of the esophagus and the stomach. And I really felt affinity with this examination because it allows visibility to our interior body. And usually with photography, you kind of relate to things of where it is, what it is, and the access of visibility is always questionable. And I was preserving bones from my own meals, neighbors' meals, and friends' meals, restaurant meals, to kind of re-internalize bones and photograph them using UV lighting, infrared lighting, X-ray film, or photograms. So kind of techniques that are associated with science images. And usually when you're looking at an image of the body, you're relying on a professional, like a medical professional, to tell you what you're seeing. And so this abstractness of science imagery really encouraged me to explore these kind of animal bones that we discard after a meal, and also this connection with nature through consuming food. This image is another one from the project called Shin Splint. And I'm going to just move on to, I extended my collection with the restaurant St. John's, where I asked if I could collect their bones from their infamous bone marrow dish, and from a busy Friday night. So I provided like alternative bins, and they collected all of the bones from this particular dish. And then I had a big bag of bones to take home with me and preserve. So this was a lot of cleaning involved, and also very in a quick time, because in a domestic setting with a lot of bones, it can be really infectious and bacteria can form, which is quite interesting because diet and disease have never really been so closely linked other than now. But with these pictures in particular, they're photograms, and they're almost like a reinterpretation of the dish, because there's usually 4 bones on a plate. And using expired paper, I work a lot with material that I'm sourcing from other photographic labs. It's been given to me, I've seeked, or I've collected it on eBay. So usually the material is the base, and once it's gone, then I need to move on. This is another image from the expedition to St. John's with infrared lighting, which I photographed with. This is a picture of me in action with the bones, which is really interesting because with infrared lighting, they're often sold as heat lamps and health lamps. So this idea of heat being used to relieve tension in muscles is something that I was really interested in, and use this kind of lighting a lot in my work. I'm just going to go to this image. I was given an ox heart from a friend of mine who works in the film industry, and she, after a shoot, there was 6 ox hearts that were sourced for 6 different takes, and those 6 ox hearts were discarded after the shoot. And she tried to save them desperately. She cooked one, she gave me one, she gave me the bits from her heart, and she collected another one which was frozen, and then I'm hoping is going to be cooked as well. But with this particular ox heart, I really wanted to make the most out of the heart bits and all the unedible bits as well as the edible bits. So I was taking the offcuts and placing them on film and creating chemograms. So by placing the flesh directly onto film substance, kind of creates these patterns and this reaction that's really unexpected, and it's these idiosyncrasies with photography that really excite me. But obviously I did make a stew with the ox heart, and that was delicious. So I guess this embracing of something from the film industry, which is just an absolute incredible organ from an animal, is, yeah, really kind of hones in on the waste that is used in producing imagery for entertainment or fashion industries, for example. And I've been working at a photographic lab for the past 5 years, and we develop film for a lot of commercial projects, usually fashion, photographic shoots. And I've been collecting negative bits from the floor, from having alternative bins. So in packaging, which little snips of film are cut off and discarded. Usually I'm sticking those little bits into the enlarger and putting them into my pockets in the end of the day. So I'm making my own kind of collection of this photographic waste. And these are some images. You can see some scraps with dust marks, tape, film clippings from the film processing, and scratches, which is all details that I'm really embracing and I get excited about. This is the book which culminated after a lot of the findings. There's a series of 3 books that were made, which takes me to a film that I've been working on, which was 83 rolls of 35mm film that were never collected since 2015. A lot of clients were contacted to collect their film. Some phone numbers didn't work, some people didn't respond, and others asked it to be discarded, finding it very difficult for me to discard it, and questioning what indexicality means, and the physicality of the film being the actual physical form of the image really led me to tape these pieces of film together and see what it would look like as a moving image. So it is 2 minutes and 2:26 seconds, and it's a very flashy and very fast, and this kind of image saturated environment that we live in, and photography being as a life practice, is something I'm really exploring in this film. So this is a current project that I'm working on now. I'm just going to move on. This is another piece of paper which I got from the skip at work, and it's a fogged roll, a fogged piece of paper which can no longer be used for printing clients' work. And seeing this in the bin, which is just showing how light is reacting with photosensitive paper, I couldn't really leave it there and took it home. So I'm going to just move on to our space in North London called Equivalent Behaviour, which you can see the lovely piece of paper is embraced in our hallway. So together with Wojciech Kavchuk, we kind of did the best we could to reuse a lot of elements. So the wall that was built for the scanning room, we dismantled another wall and used magnets to locate the screws, and used the plasterboard, and insulation, and then recreated the room by using all the existing elements. We also used the paint that was from a Forest Recycle project in Walthamstow, which is a really incredible establishment, and they're getting paint from places that aren't selling it, from dented cans to open tins, and so supporting local companies and corporations or establishments or local people that are working in similar ways that we are is really important to us. This is another image of our space, and you can see the object in the center is a light box that we made from an old wheelie table. And this is us working. Wojciech on the left is making the table for the scanning room, which is made from recycled offcuts as well. I wanted to bring in one of Dog Studios' table on the right, which is also in our space. And the tabletops on the left, on the trestles, are actually old doors, and the unit's built from recycled wood from the skip. But the man-made stone for the base of the table was collected from a local stonery nearby. And the tabletop was also made from Smith & Brown, their skip, which is a really big source of material for Stock Studios. So being material-led and material-based with making, is kind of whatever the formation is happening is kind of based on whatever has been found. So Wojciech has a container that he collects material with to use for projects, and that usually kind of deciphers what he's going to make and how he's going to make it. So this is an event that we did called Flightless, and we invited artists and a taxidermist to come and work with us. So this is an installation of G's work, which she's working with people from culling estates and also working with roadkill. And the idea of Flightless was really to connect with this biological capacity to be able to fly. And at this time that we were having the event, it was very difficult for anybody to be flying, and just relating to creatures that have this ability and relating to nature in general. This is G explaining her work. And so we invited Julian Walker, who is an artist and academic, to talk about the ostrich and ostrich eggs, which was a really beautiful bird to bring to the table as a flightless bird. We also had Martin Riley do a sound performance with a 16mm projection of a documentary called The Birds of New Zealand, which was quite beautiful. So bringing actually an archive of 16mm film, which is a personal archive, I find it really important to embrace analog practice and embrace the physicality of film. This is another event we did called Sweet Debris. So with our events, we're also really focused on working with people and bringing people together. So the furniture that we got for this event was for a project on Dartman Street that was used for an outdoor seating area. So it's borrowed furniture, and all AV equipment, sound equipment is from people that we know, people who are working in industries that we're getting in contact with, and really bringing people together to make these happen. So Sweet Debris is, we considered it to be a tension reliever for people to come and relax, eat and enjoy. And this is something we're focusing on doing more and more in the space. So we had a DJ set as well, which was really nice. And I'm going to leave you with this image because it was a slide from a slide projection that Martin Riley did another performance for, and it was a collection of a bulk buy of slides from a friend of his. I just wanted to leave it with you because it's a delectable image. So I think that's all for me.
Thank you, Katrina. That was really fascinating, and I look forward to delving deeper and talking about it further after our other presentations. Tom, do you want to go next?
Yeah, I wonder if you could unshare, Katrina, and then I'll come in. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Great. So so great to be here, part of this discussion, and it's brilliant that your different organizations are coming together. It feels like there's a bit of a critical mass, and I don't know if we've quite got to the tipping point, but brilliant to have the Gallery Climate Coalition as part of that too. And I guess one of the things we'll obviously be talking about practical measures, but I think it's not just about mitigation of the, what's the impacts of climate changes. We've also got to start thinking about adaptation. Things are going to change, aren't they, in the future? So obviously that partly that's about changing behavior, thinking about our personal carbon budget, as they call it. But I mean, actually, fundamentally, we're talking about systems change, and that affects everyone. And I think in the Gallery Climate Coalition conference, that's one of the things that Haroon Mirza was saying, that obviously it's come into his practice because artists like everyone are affected by it. But I think what I wanted to sort of focus on really is the role of the artist in how we change things, because I think quite often there's this sort of rather shortcut thinking, oh, artists are great communicators, they can reach people, but I think that we should think a bit more deeply about that. And there was actually a really good interview on the Gallery Climate Coalition website with the environmentalist and writer Mark Linus, and he was talking about learning from the global pandemic, and apparently in that sort of 1.5 years, we had a 7% cut in carbon emissions. So actually, that's exactly the sort of thing we need to really make a difference to keep to that 1.5% warming anyway. But obviously we're already getting back into business as usual, But what Mark Linus said, which was really interesting, was the thing that stuck out for him about the COVID-19 pandemic was the psychological impact. You know, it was the fact that people were really fearful for themselves. I mean, obviously, and it was dangerous, and many people died, but the psychological impact was actually what made people change their behavior. So I think in a way, that's really what I want to start by thinking about. And I always go back to Felix Guattari, who wrote Three Ecologies, which is kind of his ecosophy book. And that's really interesting because, you know, not just thinking about environmental concerns, but actually also thinking about social relationships and human subjectivity. And I suppose if we think about systems change, really what we're talking about is global consumerism. And what Guattari was saying is that's not just sort of affecting our, you know, obviously it's destroying the planet, but it's affecting our social relationships, and it's getting right inside our subjectivity. It's actually undermining what he called the singularity of subjectivity. And that is why we need the artists, particularly because of that singularity. And actually, Guattari talked about the idea of existential intensities and how we need the artist to sort of shake up that ecology of human subjectivity as part of this relationship to the wider, to social justice and climate justice too. So in terms of my curatorial practice, looking back, I mean, way back in 2009, we did 100 days countdown to the COP15, as it was then in Copenhagen at Arnolfini. And at that time, it was kind of, you know, there was the art crowd were a bit, well, I'm not sure about all these activists coming into the gallery and not sure if it's really art. And the funders were kind of, well, I'm not sure they should be doing something so political and so forth. So I mean, it really has radically changed in the last 13 years, doing my maths. But what I thought I'd do for this session is really take those three ecologies, thinking about the environment, social justice, but also subjectivity, and talk about three artists. So I'll start off with Peter Fend, who's an artist I've worked with over many years, actually done quite a number of shows with him. This is actually him in, I think it was 2001 in Plymouth. I got him a residency at Plymouth University. He's quite a, how do I put it? He's, well, you can see what he's like from this state of this room, but he's quite a character. He's quite contestational. He's a New Yorker guy. He likes to have a good discussion. But in 1980, he set up Ocean Earth, along with colleagues from the offices, people like Jenny Holzer and Richard Prince. I should have said he was actually, I started out as an assistant to Gordon Matter Clark, and he was very much involved with the land artists in the States. And one of his kind of key principles is trying to put land art into practice, actually, to make it useful, in a way, a kind of a precursor to Tania Bruguera's Art Utile, but actually making land art make a difference. So Ocean Earth, his kind of core philosophy was to put the ocean at the center. So here in this Antarctica-centered world map that he drew, you can see obviously the humans are on the land around the edges, but really at the center of this whole kind of system, this ocean system, it's the oceans. And these are just some of his sketches. So thinking about the Atlantic particularly, the Atlantic is like a kind of pump that makes the whole system work. And, you know, you can follow up from the Southern Ocean around Antarctica with the Benguela current and up into the Gulf Stream in the Northern Hemisphere and so forth. And actually, as a curator, I think I've really kind of, you know, obviously I work with artists, but a lot of what I've learned is from artists. And I learned all about issues around the Gulf Stream from Peter. And, you know, that obviously with the Arctic ice cap melting, that fresh water coming into the kind of mix here, that's threatening to actually switch off the Gulf Stream, which would radically change our environment. At the moment, the cold water from the Antarctic goes underneath that warm water that you can see circulating around from the Caribbean. and it actually appears back down in the Weddell Sea down in the Antarctica. But if it radically shifts, and it could happen quite soon, they're talking about a tipping point actually. So this was back in, gosh, 2001. I think we did a project actually about that heat exchange process. So this is a kind of model that Peter made of the Gulf Stream. And in the middle, showing this gyre is actually his friend Dennis Oppenheim had made this kind of vortex. But taking that principle of ocean at the center, land around the edge, you can obviously bring this down into sea areas. But then if you get even closer, you can go right down into river catchments. So, you know, traditionally, this is the UK, the British Islands. You know, we think of a river catchment as sort of in the land. And I think humans tend to think of everything as land centric because that's where we live. But actually, Peter's theory would shift this. So this is kind of a traditional river catchment, the Thames. But if you think of Peter's theory, the Thames feeds into that very small part of where the English Channel meets the North Sea, but so does the Rhine and the Meuse, all those rivers from the Alps all the way down into that tiny area of sea, if you like. So all the runoff coming from the Thames meets all the runoff from the Rhine and the Meuse, all through Central Europe, basically. So this is a CWIS satellite image. And you can see that red is the algae in the sea that's produced by all that runoff. And actually, one of the things Peter is fascinated with is algae. And obviously, you can produce energy from algae. You can actually, you can actually distill it and produce flames, which is something we did. And this is one of his rigs that he made for growing algae in the ocean. And actually, this is way back in 2000, we did this in Exeter, and we did produce a flame, which at the time he said was the greatest thing of his life. But I'll just show quickly, because those were kind of sketches, but this is what sometimes his work would look like this. So in the project in Osaka I talked about, he broke the Japanese islands into their watersheds. So you can zoom right into Osaka on the left and Tokyo on the right. I think that's what it would be. Yodogawa River on the left and the Tone on the right. And he also looked at the sea areas. Typically of Peter, he turned it all upside down. So it's a bit confusing because Japan's at the top, China and Korea at the bottom there. But of course, that doesn't matter because if you're looking for a space, it could be anywhere around. But that's the Japan Sea, Sea of Japan, or the East Sea as the Koreans talk about it. So the next artist I'll talk about is Maria Teresa Alves. And this is, I thought she'd be a good example in relation to social justice. And Maria Teresa, she actually helped set up the Green Party in Brazil, in Sao Paulo. And I worked with her, again, on quite a number of projects. We first worked on the Seeds of Change project in Exeter, I think it was 2001, then Liverpool, and then in Bristol. So in Bristol, we were looking at, it was actually the 200th anniversary of the parliamentary abolition of the slave trade in the UK. So I curated a show called Port City. And as part of that, Maria Teresa was really looking at these, this horrific history we all know about the Atlantic Triangle, but also thinking about maritime trade and how to think about those histories and their legacies. So if you think all those ships on that terrible trade coming into this Georgian city and all the wealth of this city, Bristol, built on the back of the plantations, when they came into port, they'd offload ballast, because if you think in that triangle, they'd take goods with them down to Africa, West Africa, then take enslaved people across to the Americas, and then come back loaded down with ballast. So in that ballast, there would be seeds. So the Seeds of Change project is really about the ballast seeds that come with those maritime ships. And this was quite a simple start to this project in Bristol. But if you see here, there's a map of all those ballast sites where it's basically, mostly mud and sand, stones or whatever, but in that would be seeds, and they were offloaded either in official ballast port stations or illegally en route, that coming into the Avon River in this case. So you can see the pins where that would be, and these are some of the sites she researched. So then she'd dig out core samples and actually start germinating plants. And the brilliant thing about this idea of hers is actually we discovered the seeds that had come on those ships could lie dormant for hundreds of years. You could grow them and make, a living history actually of that terrible trade. And then the next thing was we decided to share out this kind of germinating these ballast seeds with different communities. So that's Gloria in the middle with I think they were called the Looked After, Fostered and Transracially Adopted, LUFTA group. And so lots of different groups were growing these plants. And also Maria Teresa was kind of finding specimens which had come from the Caribbean or the Americas, or even from West Africa. She thought one of them, Sola Kali there that she's painted. And then she had an idea of making a ballast seed garden out of this. But this developed, this is the way projects happen, of course, slowly. And we worked with the University of Bristol, the Botanical Gardens, and we started, kind of growing up different ballast seed flora and having lots of community engagement around this. And then in 2012, I think it was, we managed to get hold of this barge, this grain barge, and actually make a ballast seed garden on it. It's a floating grain barge on the floating harbour in Bristol. And these are all plants which would come with those ships. So this really is literally the living history of the trade of that city. And the wealth of that city is built on the back of that plantation, those scene, that awful triangular trade. And, this is where we are, the same part of the floating harbour where Colston was toppled in 2019. So then the last artist I'll talk about in relation to subjectivity of that three ecologies, thinking about human subjectivity, Hito's style. And Hito really, thinking about this new digital network society that we live in, and, how this kind of what Manuel Castells has called a space of flows is actually getting right inside our head. In fact, I think Biffo Berardi writes about the internet as a kind of, he talks about this semiotic flux as a sort of a kind of cognitive capitalism. It's actually kind of, he talks about desingularization. He's a kind of disciple of Guattari. And he yearns for a kind of intimacy, a reconnecting with what he calls the body of the mother. But in this piece from Hito, just to say, look, here, talking of the Atlantic, this isn't a map of ships. This is a map of the internet cables under the Atlantic, which is kind of an interesting parallel. But if you see all of those internet cables arriving into the UK are kind of hitting the southwest of England, which is where I'm based now. And apparently, I think Trevor Pagnon says something like 90% of all the world's data flows through these cables under the ocean. This is in North Cornwall, actually. GCHQ, which is where Edward Snowden said the total surveillance was happening, where the NSA was tapping our information right here in Mornstone, north of Bude. So the film we showed in Osaka, Liquidity Inc. by Hito Style, really kind of, it's an interesting kind of parable. It brings of this kind of new space of flows, thinking it's kind of bringing together a number of different strands, if you like. I mean, it's kind of, on the one hand, it's a kind of free association on contemporary economics, but it's also thinking about precarious labor and climate change. So kind of drawing parallels between financial storms, flows of people, and these turbulent weather systems. And this was in the Dojima River Forum. It was part of this Biennale down in the basement. So I'll just show you what it looked like, because we projected it in, we made a kind of cinema space in the underground car park, actually, with this kind of wave form of judo mats. And then the film tells three stories, essentially. One is about Jacob Wood, this chap who was an orphan in Vietnam, brought over in Gerald Ford's Operation Baby Lift. In the dot-com boom, he became a banker. And then with Lehman Brothers, where he was working, he lost his job. So kind of being tossed around on these kind of turbulent waters, if you like. And then another strand is talking about the weather underground, and kind of like a weather report of the collapse of capitalism thing. And Weather Underground is actually a kind of militant left-wing group in the 1960s, early 70s. But the story I really wanted to tell you about was the story of water. So this water talking in the first person, giving subjective agency to water. And you can see at the bottom, I am liquidity incorporated. So all of these are kind of metaphors of liquidity, but fundamentally speaking as water in the first person. And many scientists think of water as having come to this planet of ours in one kind of go, coming from the Milky Way, a kind of spring in the Milky Way, coming on comets, and actually landing on this rock. And obviously water is life and producing life, and then recycling round and round. But I think that's an incredible metaphor, because if you think of water is life, and we're kind of busily destroying every aspect of water, poisoning it, polluting it, why couldn't it just head off to another rock and leave this awful, wretched planet behind? So I am water, we are water. Out of that, I'm thinking about how do we give a voice to water, we humans? So we're thinking about a parliament of waters. And obviously here we can see the water protectors at the Standing Rock Indian Reservation, who were protesting against the Dakota Access Pipeline, which was going to affect the Missouri River. So really it's kind of First Nation people who are leading this conversation, and also Indigenous people. So in Aotearoa, New Zealand, the river Whanganui is the first river to have been given legal personhood, which was negotiated, I mean, over 150 years this is, by the Maori, but it actually has legal personhood in the kind of juridical system. So, and this is in Makoko in the Lagos Lagoon, which is a kind of slum that's actually kind of stretching out into the water, and the water's rising, obviously. And Kunle Adeyemi, when the architects have built this floating school. So this is what I'm talking about, adaptation. I'm probably running out of time, but I'll finish off telling you about the conversation.
A little bit over time, Tom.
Okay, I better stop. Okay, I'll stop. But I was going to finish with your great quote about, which you'll probably have, Annika, about Maya Angelou saying, "It's not what you do that people remember.
It's how you make them feel."
It's how you make them feel. Okay, I'll stop there.
Which is something that I heard over and over again at COP26. And so that's a great segue into my presentation.
There you go. Sorry to go on for too long.
Thank you.
Over to you.
And I will make it short and sweet. And just before I do that, I see we have a comment from Norwood Creech about the fact that people are also composed mostly of water, which is absolutely true, and something to definitely think about, although I wish we didn't always have to be so selfish about how we want to save the planet and bring it back to us all the time. But still, that is a good way of, and I'll give you another good fact, which is that the Gulf Stream that you mentioned and the tipping point, right, which they recently have said is going to happen sooner than they had previously thought, and they now need to do a recalculation. But how much it stands to affect, again, thinking selfishly about ourselves here in the UK, it would probably create about a 3 degrees centigrade drop in temperature, which would, you know, create a lot of storms and very different temperatures than we're used to now. A lot of people think, I've heard some people say, you know, oh, but I like it warmer, it's nice. Well, guess what, England, that's not how it's going to end up for you. But also Sweden will become uninhabitable, which is really depressing considering they're the ones leading the charge. And, you know, they're going to achieve their Paris Accord agreements before any other country. And yet, you know, no matter how hard they try, it's quite likely that their country will become uninhabitable in the future. You're talking about adaptation. I mean, that's a depressing thought. And the Mississippi River can be considered America's greatest drainage ditch, Norwood is saying, which is also a depressing thought. I myself am involved in a local, because I live in Hastings, and I like to sea swim. I moved here about 2.5 years ago, and I was of course disappointed to realize that there are issues with a lot of overflow of sewage into not only our local waters, but all around the UK because of a very, you know, over-reliance on antiquated Victorian plumbing and having a lot of privatized water companies that have monopolies, and they have just been, you know, giving dividends to shareholders and massive bonuses to CEOs instead of investing in the infrastructure to deal with that. So so that is, of course, a big problem that we're kind of working on coming together and taking political action about. And we've also, you know, talked with local artists and such as Fiona Banner and different people about, you know, how to do something about all of this. And anyway, I won't get too far into my local politics, but I'm going to screen share. Okay, hopefully everyone can see my screen. Is that correct? Yeah. Okay. So a little history about, you know, why is Articheck getting itself into sustainability concerns for the art world? Well, in a nutshell, basically, I care about it. I'm the founder and CEO, and so there. I was protesting with Extinction Rebellion a couple of years ago at Trafalgar Square, and I had, you know, the National Gallery behind me, and I was just contemplating about how a lot of my fellow rebels probably had no idea about the massive carbon footprint and the fact that it was largely completely unnecessary of the massive carbon footprint of the National Gallery just behind us. And I thought, you know, I can make a bigger impact trying to help lead my industry into more sustainable practices than just being a body in a protest. And I thought that I was well positioned to do something because of, you know, having a tool such as Articheck, which, in case people aren't familiar with it, I was originally an art conservator working for Tate, doing a lot of condition reporting and having very little time for conservation treatment. So when the iPad came out, I decided to try and design an app to help streamline condition reporting as a process and create an international industry standard. So I was already kind of dedicated to bringing the art world into the 21st century with technology and tech tools to make things more efficient. So I felt like I was in a good position to help through technology to provide tools which would further help to reduce carbon footprint. And that's what we've been working towards for the last couple of years. And actually, interestingly, the pandemic has kind of, in fact, created opportunities in those areas. So in doing our research, we have found that the three biggest areas for most arts organizations' carbon footprint is staff travel, shipping, and buildings. It may not surprise most of you here to discover. And so we have and are in the process of building tools to address all three of these areas. And we estimate that most arts organizations, just through engaging with us, can achieve their 2030 Paris targets of a 50% or more reduction in their carbon footprint, because these are such large areas. Buildings is the biggest one. And we have, you can find on our website, if you're interested to find out more, we've done a webinar with Samuel Anderson Architects last July, and the recording is on our blog, on our website, about how museums can save a projected 24 to 34% of their total energy footprint simply by adjusting their HVAC system settings to the green climate control protocols, the BIS-08 protocols. Why has that not been done yet? Well, there's a couple of theories. There's been a Getty bit of research as to why that is. One of the top reasons is really around fear of being, the one to do it, and whether there might be a condition reaction to the collection that might be damaging, and whether, it might be your fault if you're the one to do it. Another reason is that it's not, my job, it's not under my remit, people thinking it's somebody else's remit to do this and to champion this, and that it's not coming from the leadership, and that it's not being prioritized from a budget point of view of looking at, even though ultimately it is a cost saving exercise. It will also save you 24 to 34% of your energy bill to do this. But that it will take some time and attention and care to make sure that you're doing it in a way that is not damaging your most fragile objects, right? So for most museums or collections, their settings, their standard default settings are based on the most fragile stuff, the most fragile 5% of your collection. And so the idea is that you can actually nowadays place those 5% of things in a microclimate inside a frame or a display case or a storage case or a room, and you can then relax the climate control everywhere else, right? So it involves doing a survey of your collection and your display spaces, removing the most fragile stuff, and then relaxing the environment. So what we propose is that organizations do that on a pilot project basis by finding a space, removing the most fragile stuff or putting it in a microenvironment, reducing or relaxing the environment, uploading the object list into ArtEcheck, placing sensors from our sensor partner into the space, and then we will, after a period of 3 or 6 or 9 months, produce a report which adds confidence that everything's okay, and you can kind of move on to the next space. Now, a big reason that museums give for not doing this so far also is lender agreements. And we're going to talk about lender agreements in a second, but essentially the kind of standard lender agreement of today says, requires the most rigorous protocols are followed for this loan of artworks for this exhibition. And whenever I hear people say that from museums, one of the first things I say to them is, okay, well, so what does your lender agreement say? And they often say to me, I have no idea. Maybe I should look into that. And I say, well, that's something you do have power over, right? You have power over what your own lender agreement says, and you can start this whole shift and change by changing your lender agreement. And one thing that we hope to do this year is to have a user conference where we invite everyone to participate in one session, which is about a kind of global summit for lender agreements and changing them to default to the green protocols, so that, of course, if you need to for a very fragile work, you can upgrade it to more rigorous controls, but that your default setting is the green controls. And so one thing that an artist can do to support this effort is to stipulate as part of the acquisition contract that your work is going to follow more sustainable protocols for the future. So that can be having the lender agreement stipulate the green BIS-08 protocols are used for loans. That can also be around using sea freight for shipping wherever possible. And that can also be around couriers that are used for this particular artwork. So artists can potentially drive this change by stipulating to the galleries, collectors, and museums that they work with that they want this change, that they don't want their artwork to be involved in kind of outdated, traditional, and carbon-heavy practices unnecessarily. So the next thing to talk about is shipping. So I alluded to sea freight. And sea freight is something we talked about in a webinar previously co-hosted by Dax. And so, you may be aware of this already as a shift and a wish for more art to be transported via sea freight. It's 95% lower carbon footprint compared with air freight. So it's quite a huge, massive difference. I know that Maersk is coming out with solar operated sea freight ships. So pretty soon it's going to be 100% better. And, but of course there are concerns around the duration of sea freight compared with air freight. And there's also concerns around humidity and, conditions of being appropriate for artwork. Those are the two major barriers around more use of sea freight shipping. And of course, there's also a temporary issue, which is the global supply chain crisis that we're currently in because of the pandemic. And so, the normal time that it takes, like, for example, normally it's 2 or 3 weeks between London and New York, but right now it's like you can double or triple that. So it's really difficult at the moment to get people to start to use sea freight more because of the time frames that we're talking about. But ultimately, where there is demand, there will be supply, and this will resolve itself. And in the future, this is something that we should really seriously look at as a means to reduce the carbon footprint of our industry. And we are working very closely with insurance partners about this. They are coming out now with new insurance guidelines that make it easier for people to use sea freight from an insurance perspective. And you might be surprised that insurers who are all about risk would be willing to do that. Well, they say, and I think that if the insurers are willing to look at it this way, all the rest of us need to start to look at it this way. They say, we do not want to disincentivize our clients to take on new behaviors that will ultimately lead to less damage of cultural heritage property. So, if the insurers are willing to do that, I really think that the rest of us need to be willing to look at this more and more. And again, if you're interested in learning more about this, we can provide you with some more details, but we have created a product which makes it easier to have oversight and to comply to the new guidelines of the insurance providers around sea freight. So the other thing is staff travel. Now, I mentioned about COVID providing an opportunity. That was because the standard operating procedure for museums for loans is to have a human chaperone, as you're probably aware, for artwork, for exhibitions and loans. With the pandemic, that was not possible. And we built a product, a virtual courier product, in order to meet the new needs in a COVID world, because we thought that even in the medium and long term, we would have a dramatic decrease of budgets in the medium term because of the economic kind of crisis following the pandemic. And this is a lot cheaper. And then we would also have the long-term wish to be more sustainable. And so that's why we went ahead and built a robust professional solution for virtual courier, and which is, you might have heard about museums using virtual courier solutions that are kind of homegrown guidelines. Those are very, very insecure. And so that's something that we are trying to educate the community not to do. And again, we are very happy to provide more details about why that is. But we have had really great results with our virtual courier product. And you can find case studies on our website. We're happy to send them to you. But basically, on average, so far, we've saved 50,000 pounds and 50,000 tons for every project on average so far. So it's really significant, both in terms of cost and carbon savings. Especially because it's usually business class travel that we're talking about. And we are getting increasingly more used to remote working, right? We're all used to Zoom now. We're all used to doing things more remotely. This is basically taking that a step further. And we now have another tool, which is not just about transit, but which is also about installation and packing instructions. and discuss, and also conservation treatment progress, and basically looking at a lot of different kinds of workflows and dealing with those remotely more and more, so as to reduce carbon footprint. Now, this is me doing my presentation for COP26 last November, and we will, as the follow-up when we send the recording for this webinar, send you a link to that if you're interested in watching it. It's under 5 minutes. It's pretty short and snappy, I think, and it's also a lot about, you know, the reason that I was speaking there was to look at the bigger picture for those that are not within the art world about, you know, how can we use innovation and digitization to move to more sustainable practices within the culture sector, and why that's important. So, you know, as Tom and Katrina alluded to, you know, it's important because culture is like the storyteller of our society and helps us to process things and envision a future and kind of understand how to move towards that, and to highlight things that are important, and to look at things from a different perspective, and to kind of take a moment and take a step out and say, you know, hey, wait a minute, what we're doing right now is crazy. But of course, the art world also has to be credible in advocating for change and sustainability. And you can only remain credible if you're, you know, moving towards more sustainable practices yourself. So from my perspective, that's why it's important for us to do that. So with that, I will finish. This is just an example of some of the concepts we were talking about with the lender agreements and the virtual courier stuff, but I've probably gone on over time. This is my way, and so I will stop there. We're going to open things up to Q&A now. And I would like to kind of kick things off by saying something about what Katrina is doing with her body of work, and how I just want to basically say that waste is another, it's really interesting actually that Ellie chose you two, because in fact, oceans and waste are like my two pet environmental subjects. So I think that that's really great, because I happen to know some things about these areas. And so when it comes to waste, did you know that if food waste specifically was a country, it would have the second largest carbon footprint in the world. So just by tackling food waste, we would be a really long way towards meeting our kind of collective targets for reducing our carbon footprint by half as a kind of global economy. I don't know so much about animal waste, but I know that fruit and vegetable waste, it's like something like 40% of fruits and vegetables are wasted. And that, you know, there's various reasons why. But often, and still to this day, a lot of it has to do with supermarkets having way overly rigorous protocols around what they see as perfection. So for example, red gala apples need to be 50% red to be accepted by a supermarket. And, you know, cucumbers must be straight, et cetera, et cetera. And my first ever investment in another kind of fellow startup company was back in 2018 with Oddbox, which is a company that is dedicated, you may have heard of it, to addressing this problem. And so they take fruits and vegetables that have been rejected by supermarkets, and they have a fruit and veg box delivery service, which started in London, but has now extended to a much greater area of the UK. And so I think support of these kinds of initiatives is super important, but I think that it is all about circularity, right? We need to move to a much more circular economy. Right now, as things stand, 9% of things are circular, are reused or recycled in some way in the world. So obviously that's way too little a number, and we have to really move in another direction. And so I think, Katrina, the way that you are addressing waste by, you know, being so committed to reusing everything and kind of drawing attention to the fact that that is possible, you know, with time and space and creativity, I think is a really wonderful thing. So maybe you could tell us a little bit about what kind of spurred you on, inspired you to work in this area in the first place.
I think it's, I have a really big interest in food, and growing up in a household that didn't waste much food. I think moving to London, I was really astounded by, I mean, the amount of food, the amount of mouths that need to be fed, and the kind of delineation of what's actually in a product. I mean, you've got like companies saying that animal, like I think there was some kind of argument with Tesco saying that like Boswell Farms was providing some meat, and Boswell Farms, they discovered, actually didn't exist. So the misguidance of information on packaging and trying to understand what is nutritional and how you can actually rely on what you are consuming, these are all have come hand in hand, I guess, with my thinking and what I'm interested in. But I think also having experience in supermarkets here, I'm from Australia, and I mean, yeah, no, there's other things going on there, and I'm not saying that it's different and there's more, it's just moving to a bigger city. And I think it really started in London, where I really took this commitment to be using this as material, and also as a daily practice. I mean, photography is also a daily practice. We experience things through images, and same, like I think it was Hito Steyl that said, you know, photography is a life practice. It's an existing thing like you and me. And also its flow into the digital world has kind of dislocated this location of the image. So the source of the image and the source of where the food is coming from, that both of those two elements are really big interests for me. And not understanding where the source could be for something that we're putting to our bodies is a really big discussion in itself. And even use by dates, for instance, I mean, you think, oh, actually that's 43% of food waste is due to use by dates and people throwing food out because of the use by date. In fact, if you smell it could be used a little bit later. It's just a guideline, you know. So understanding these facts and how information is being presented to us, I think is about education.
Totally. Ellie, I think, have you got some prepared questions that you want to dig into?
I mean, I think that question was a really great one to begin with, to be honest, because I think, just as an observation, Katrina, your use of food waste within your work and kind of how that sort of disrupts our consumer relationship to waste as something that we'd normally relegate to something that no longer serves us, I think kind of aligns in some ways to Hito Steyl's subjectivity, water subjectivity, in a sense that you kind of are suddenly transforming something that would be discarded into something that has agency and integrity. So that's just something that, like, as an observation rather than a question, that came out to me when you were talking about your different projects.
Well, I think also we need to, something that I think even still hasn't dawned on a lot of us. I know that it's kind of, I've had a personal, more of an epiphany about it recently, even though I've been kind of, you know, recycling since I was a little kid in California, and one of the first places that did it, and have always cared about this stuff. But the idea that nothing is waste, that waste is a construct that doesn't even exist, you know, and that actually everything needs to be used for something else ultimately. And, you know, just that because we put it in a bin and put the bin on the side of the road it's not going to just like disappear, you know, into some void. It all goes somewhere, and we really, really need to be much more conscious about that. But sorry, I'll shut up now, Ellie.
No, I mean, I guess one of the things that I really wanted to ask all of you actually from your different perspectives is, you know, we've seen a bit about like all the different processes that go into making art. Like art isn't just an object, it's part of a generative and regenerative process. And I think that's why it's so important to have artists at the table when talking about the environment and how to kind of address the environmental crisis. I mean, how much do you think that the pace in which the art world moves affects or has a kind of damaging impact on the climate? And how much do you think that kind of impacts sustainability in terms of how quickly exhibitions need to be put on, how quickly a commission needs to be realised, and I guess what the value might be of sort of slowing down the pace or changing the pace in which work is created or realised?
Gosh, who's going to go? I mean, it's arts. Our world is quite a small, tiny world, isn't it, within the bigger scheme of things? But we've all got to try and shift our behaviours. But I mean, if you think of it in terms of systems change, it's quite interesting because I think you know, the trouble with talking about the Anthropocene is it kind of shares the blame out equally with all human beings, but actually it's all about consumerism. It's kind of, there is a specific history around what climate change, and you know, that is bound up with colonialism. So we need to start kind of you know, kind of moving away from this kind of universalist approach, which is kind of somehow erasing this history of colonialism, and listen to different voices. So it's interesting because I was finding Katrina's practice almost felt like the end of something. It was, you know, the kind of feeling I was getting from the work was that we're at the end times of something, and maybe we're at the end times of contemporary art practice. You know, maybe there needs to be a kind of shift. I mean, we're talking about playing around with the remnants of modernism, and we're talking about how we deal with white cube installations and so forth.
Well, I certainly think we all know that anything can be art by now, right? I mean, Duchamp and Warhol did their jobs quite a while ago, but you know, now we really know all about it. And
Well, if you think about like the lifespan as well, how you kind of measure the lifespan of an artwork, you know, just thinking about all the different projects you described, Tom, and also your work, Katrina, in the sense that, you know, in a way you're like kind of diverting the course of the waste that you're encountering and giving it a continued life. And almost in a sense, like, how do you measure the lifespan of an artwork? And is that actually the thing maybe that makes it sustainable, that makes a practice sustainable? The idea that the lifespan is beyond our own human life and is much more extensive. Yeah, that's just something that occurred to me in all of the work you both described, actually.
I think it's also with the position of art in connection with other human beings. It's like if a gallery is one place, there needs to be many other ways for people to encounter art, where that is just becoming a part of our daily life as well. And I think it's, instead of having small galleries where you need to go and visit and go out of your way, it's how accessible is this as a place for people, for a place for people to walk past. I mean, to walk past and intercept perhaps in your day and catch your attention. I think there just needs to be more visibility and accessibility with art. I mean, having different contexts for art to be in, I think, is really important to make art sustainable in a way.
I totally agree. And I am a conservator, and so I also have opinions about art's lifespan. And you know, one of the difficulties that we have in conservation practice, thinking about sustainability, is the fact that, well, for a long time there's been an ethical thing around you know, the best way to preserve art is to stick it in a dark box somewhere, right, for no one to ever see it. And then what's the point of it? Why would it exist if you're just going to do that with it, right? So you can't go to that extreme. You have to allow people to enjoy it, and there has to be some kind of balance. And I think that's always been true, but now we also have to think about, as Tom said, a kind of carbon budget around things. And is preservation of a collection so important in terms of the carbon footprint of the air conditioning being on 24 hours a day? Is that more important than the survival of our species? Probably not.
I realize the time is quickly running out, but we do have one question that's come through, and maybe to kind of conclude the conversation, which I know has really only just begun, and it really could evolve into much more, but I mean, the presentations have been really wonderful. This question is from Anita Lawler, and she says, the value of locality and community is something that both Katrina and Tom touched on in their wonderful presentations. What are the panel's thoughts on how we balance the potential of engaging at the local level with influencing change at a global scale? Big one.
Sorry if I can go in. I stopped because I'd gone on too long, but where I was just going to get on to is actually it's all about community engagement. It's all, that thing of, if we could have a parliament of waters to give a voice to water, that's, we're going to have human beings really kind of representing their local bodies of water. So, I mean, obviously we all know that statement, think global, act local, but actually it's got to be about an immediate responsibility. I think in the States they have this term about river keepers, something about sort of really kind of taking responsibility for your local body of water, and then think about how that connects with the ocean. This is why I love Peter's kind of metaphor of ocean earth. It's kind of, we're all connected, but we have this local relationship. And actually, oh, sorry, I've forgotten the chap's name. As was said in the chat, we are water. We're 75% water. Kind of, we've got to look after the stuff. It's us.
Absolutely, I totally agree. And there's one more quick thing which is in the chat, which is from Valentina Perez, which is who wanted to make an observation as an art handler and conservator. And she believes it's very important to focus on the moment the artwork comes out from a studio, recording the basic condition, making clear installation instructions, and so on. Often we waste time trying to understand if a specific damage was caused in production or something has happened in transit. The process of going backwards and forwards between the gallery and the previous handler and restorers can take weeks and multiple shippings. Which is something that Articheck completely allows you to avoid. So I'll just plug that. And another big issue comes from packing, crating, and shipping, as the materials used aren't recyclable and multiple crates are used just once. Thank you, I appreciate your efforts. So we are actually in conversation with a load of different organizations, including GCC, about creating a project planning based carbon calculator, in which you will be able to input what kind of materials and crates you plan to use and see the carbon footprint and hopefully including the life cycle calculations of those, and also what alternatives there are and how that would impact the carbon footprint of your project. So things like that are coming, they're in the pipeline, and it's going to be really important that everyone kind of supports them and this shift. And again, I think in terms of practical things that artists can do, it's about advocating that, to the different stakeholders that you work with, that you want to see this kind of change. So I thank you everyone so much for coming, and for the panelists, thank you so much for your presentations and your work. And please, thank you so much for also choosing to focus and emphasize these important topics in your practice. And we really appreciate that you have that you've done that. And thank you, Ellie, for bringing their important work to our attention.
Oh, thank you so much. I think it's actually so valuable to be able to have all these different perspectives in the room together. And this is how change happens, because it's not just science and technology alone that can make that change. And I think everybody here has something valuable to contribute and should be at the table having those conversations. And obviously, Annika, you're doing amazing work at ArtEvolve, which is really visionary and really important. So yeah, thank you very much for inviting us as well to take part in your webinar. It's been really, really interesting.
Thank you. Thanks very much and have a great evening.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye bye.